Hey there, everybody. This week, I'd like to talk to you about a comparison between two different football coaches and how they handle press conferences. Last week, I wrote a post about the press conference that the head coach for the Las Vegas Raiders, an NFL team, did after they lost a game which they really should have won. They lost to the Carolina Panthers. And after the game, the coach talked to the press, and it really wasn't his finest moment. Just to recap, in case you've missed the post or just to set us up here for this discussion, he talked to the press, and this is a quote that he said. "We got our ass whooped," the Raiders coach told reporters. "We pet on our pads. I don't know. Got to get on the sled. Same group that's, for the most part, all come back in same technique, same coaches. It's not a different scheme. So obviously, we have to coach better and be some hard asses on the guys, and guys have to take some rough coaching because just didn't see that on either side of the ball. We had an opportunity to run the ball and we didn't do that at all. We tried and tried and tried, and I would have booed us too. Offensively, defensively, we didn't do a good enough job up front, not good enough." Now, there's not a problem in acknowledging when things go wrong, when you get a bad result. To do otherwise, that would be dishonest. But there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it that is constructive and it doesn't throw your team under the bus so much. He was really big on saying we. At least nowhere in the account that I saw did he ever say I. It was always, we didn't do good. We need to coach better. He did acknowledge that there needs to be some better coaching, apparently. But it really kind of lacked finesse and savvy when you talk about something your team does versus yourself and the way you include or distance yourself. A couple of the highlights that he talked about was where he said specifically where we've got to coach better and some hard asses on the guys. Do you need to say that to the press? I would say it's really a more of a situation where you do something to improve versus kind of saying it to, I don't know, maybe it's a little CYA. But the worst offense here was the I would have booed us. Why does this need to be said? Um, he's got to pick his team up, and this is just kind of kicking them when they're down. Two more statements. He goes on to say, so I think as the game went on, I don't think it was the team. I think there was definitely some individuals that made business decisions and will make business decisions going forward as well. The first question that comes to my mind is how did the culture evolve to where people were making these decisions on the field playing a game? Now it's a business, so people always want to make them in their own interest, but also you got to make them in the context of trying to win the game. But also, kind of threatening players, probably not the best move. Coaches tend not to turn out too well, and they especially threaten the big players. I don't know which players this was alluding to. The last comment was when he was asked of what he could take away. Antonio Pierce, the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, responded, "Nothing." Now, this was really a missed opportunity because it was a great chance to be self-deprecating and to begin establishing a mindset for improvement. And we could have said something as simple as, it's a long list of things that we have to do to improve, to get better at. Or we could have commended, the other team, the Panthers, and said, any team can win any game. This is the NFL. Demonstrate some grace, and some sportsmanship. Didn't really do that. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, this past weekend, today is the 30th of September, University of Georgia and University of Alabama played a football game, and Alabama won. It was a very good football game. And during his post-game press conference, Kirby Smart, the head coach for the Georgia Bulldogs, struck a different tone, shall we say. He begins it off with saying, that it was a hell of a game, lots of respect for the other team and for their fans. Um, a lot of this falls on me for coaching, but he's proud of his team and the adjustments that they made. He also gives credit to Alabama. He gives credit to his own team, and that now they've got to get ready for a tough opponent next week. So he's already beginning to had his team in that mindset of, okay, we've got this game in the books. What's next? And when questioned a little bit further, he acknowledged there were some faults. He said they needed to be more aggressive. They need to do a better job of stopping the runs and doing the runs. And he emphasized some of the things that they did well. He complimented the opposing players, saying they were great kids. He knew some of them. Some of them had visited Georgia, considering playing for that team, and that they weren't doing a good enough job stopping them on the field. But he was proud of the way his team played. And he comments constructively, like there was a fumble, and he commented about it in the sense of he's sure that the player, a Georgia player, would have wanted that one back, instead of it being a fumble like it was. But it was done constructively, and he credits the team, the opposition, his team, his guys, and he describes how his team was like connected and proud to play together, and that they learned a lot about themselves. Very different from the professional team coach that was just kind of running over his team as he was going through the press conference. And he wraps up saying that he was proud of his team's response to adversity, and that they're fighters, and that they'll carry on, and that it's time for the next play. It's time for the next game. And he had that question a couple of times of what do you do in the situation? He's like, it's time for the next. It's time for the next play. What do you do next? This really demonstrates a more experienced. Kirby Smart has been in his position much longer than Antonio Pierce has. This is like I think only his first or second year with the Las Vegas Raiders. But just how he looks at the team and understand how he's going to lead them, and how tough it is to compete, and giving the other team so much of its so much credit, so much due, and respect, versus you know really denigrating his own team, which is what Pierce did in his press conference. So, what do we take from this as a leader? We compete, we try and work on something the best that we can, and how we communicate those results can make a huge amount of difference. Because when we're on a team that fails, whether it's losing a game, something goes wrong, maybe we lose a contract, lose a customer, whatever it could be, have to lay people off. It's how do you lead? How do you communicate that team through that crisis? And that's something to really keep in mind. Is it's a little crisis. It's not in these instances they're losses. They're important within the context of the games, and the coaching jobs and such. But how do you get through it? What do you do for that next step? Do you begin building your team back up for that next challenge to face that on? Or are you going to get more mired in, okay, this is what happened, and being very public, with what happened? And this is one of the big changes. Is there is a saying that, you praise in public, you criticize in private. Now, criticizing in private does not mean you don't acknowledge what went wrong. You acknowledge stuff that goes wrong. And the way that Coach Smart did it was very inclusive. It was the team together. He wasn't calling people out. He wasn't sending them out for being, making selfish decisions the way that Pierce did, the way that Coach Pierce did. You set yourself up for that next step. You learn, like Kirby Smart said, we learned a lot about ourselves. What are we going to do for that next game? Versus, Pierce had almost that more of a threatening tone, like we're going to make business decisions too. You take the actions you need to take. You don't need to telegraph them. You don't need to demonstrate them. You work with your team. You communicate publicly as is appropriate, but you want to keep your team intact. You want to keep the morale intact as best you can. So this is an interesting case study in the two ways that these coaches communicated. There'll be a link to Coach Smart's press conference here in this post, so you can go and watch that one, and also a link to the article that had the press conference from Coach Pierce, and you can kind of compare the two, see what you think. I'm curious to hear. Have a good one.